Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest. We're joined by Amy Leschke-Kahle, who's the Vice President of Performance Acceleration at the Marcus Buckingham Company and ADP Company, to talk about the secret sauce to keeping any team engaged. Amy, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Chris. How are you? Or I guess good afternoon where you are.
Good afternoon. What time is it where you are?
It is 11:04 a.m. in the central time zone of the U.S.
So after this, you can go for lunch or go for a run, whatever it may be.
Could be a walk. Could be, sure.
Before we jump in, tell everyone a bit about yourself personally, Amy, and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, I'm kind of, the typical non-traditional HR person like so many of us are. I'm actually a chemical engineer by training. And weirdly got into the HR space doing talent acquisition, which I honestly didn't have a whole lot of business doing, but I learned quickly. And through that, really have spent the rest of my career doing all kinds of HR talent stuff, including leading an HR analytics team, HRIT, learning and development, a bunch of other talent functions, doing a little Lean Six Sigma along the way, and worked for a number of big global organizations.
How did you end up doing the talent acquisition piece? Where did that come from?
I was leading a career services office at a university in the States, and for a college of engineering because of my engineering background. And one of my client kind of customers who I used to place co-op students with just one day asked me, hey, would you be interested in coming and working for us and kind of doing this work? And maybe not the best answer, but I said, sure, of course I would, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. But that was the transition. And then about 6 years ago, I made my way to the Marcus Buckingham Company and had the great privilege of working and still do work with Marcus around how do we help people do more of their own unique best work. And so I've spent the last 6 years working with organizations all around the world, big companies, little companies, for-profit, not-for-profit, pretty much every vertical you could think of, really helping organizations rethink how they do work.
Well, for those that aren't familiar with the business, give us a bit more information about Marcus Buckingham Company and also about your particular role in the organization and what attracted you from, going from being a HR practitioner to working in the business.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it was the opportunity to work with Marcus Buckingham. I mean, most folks in the HR world know who he is, best-selling author, researcher, just amazing, brilliant person. And that really was that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go really help, I'll say, broaden my reach around the work of making work better. A little over 3 years ago, we actually got purchased by ADP. People will often ask us well, why did ADP buy the Marcus Buckingham Company? We're an education company, a leader development organization. We have a tech product. We're a coaching organization. And the data that we have, because we are so research-based, I'm sure we'll talk about the data and the research, but because we are so grounded in really good, valid research, the data that we have is unbelievable around human performance at work and engagement at work. And ADP has the world's best data around payroll, how much people get paid, where do they sit, all of that kind of metadata that goes with the ins and outs of managing and doing this thing called work. And when you put those two together, those two data sources together, it's just an unbelievable combination. And it's been just a great partnership.
What's your role in the organization?
Oh, well, what I do now is I spend most of my time working with our clients. So I also lead our research team, but most of my time is spent working with CHROs and HR leaders and organizations, helping them to, number one, increase engagement in their organization. And number two, really rethink how they do work. So many of the practices that we as HR practitioners have kind of leaned into or grabbed onto, at least over the course of my career, really just didn't produce the results that, at least in my case, my story is that I thought they would. So I've spent, the last 6 years helping organizations really think differently about that and leaning into some really good research to help inform what we do with downstream decisions. And lo and behold, we help organizations do some pretty incredible things in a very short period of time.
Given the current events we're going through right now, why is engagement, more important now than ever?
Let's start off by defining engagement. So we define engagement as the emotional precursors to extraordinary work. And I think engagement in general has been one of those words, much like culture or strategy. It's like, what the heck is that? Like it becomes something that we all kind of assume we know what it means. And in the world of engagement, of course, you'll hear people say satisfaction or happiness or climate or culture and doing all these surveys and asking all these questions. And part of the challenge with not having a really clear definition is it's really hard to do something about it. It's hard to measure it reliably and validly. So if you narrow that focus onto this really narrow band of impact called engagement, the emotional precursors to extraordinary work, then you can actually do something about it. So today, in the world of all this disruption that every human on the planet is experiencing right now from so many different directions, when you look at that, how do we help people navigate this? How do we help people, number one, stay focused? How do we help them stay connected? How do we help maintain the cultural threads in an organization? How do we help them remain agile? All of those things are about employee engagement. And when people are in a position and are working in the conditions that help them do more of their own unique best work, focus happens, agility happens, change happens, people stay connected, and that culture thread stays woven in the organization. So it is more important than ever. It's one of the few things I think that we know for sure in the world of HR as well. We know what drives impact, what makes impact, what drives performance, and it's when people are connected to their work and when they're connected to their leaders.
And obviously you work with many CHROs, some of which we work with too. What are you hearing from them? And then how are you helping them through these times at the moment?
Yeah, and I'm hearing you're hearing the same thing from a lot of leaders. I think initially it was chaos, quite frankly. Obviously, no one expected pandemic and no one expected some of the other things that are happening in our world right now with a lot of the protests in the midst of a pandemic. And we've got employees who are out there participating and letting their voices be heard, which is wonderful. But it's also scary because we're upping the chances of people getting sick. And so we've got these two major global disruptions happening at the same time. And just as organizations started to settle in a little bit to this kind of, it's not even a new normal. I don't like the term new normal. I'm like, I don't know what it is. But to kind of settle into this spot of chaos, we've just kind of settled into this plateau a little bit. Now we've got something else that comes along. And so what I'm hearing from my clients, and particularly CHROs, a little bit of angst, like now what do we do? But also at the same point in time, a lot of, quite frankly, support, a lot of introspection and retrospection about what they can do, and a lot of positivity about this is our moment. And not only from what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, but also from the pandemic and at the same time. But a lot of folks really taking a moment to think of what are we going to do? And what are we going to do as an organization? What is our voice during this time? How do we let our employees have that voice? And how do we help people work safely and help them stay focused? And all of those things coming at the same time. And of course, that requires a couple key things from an HR leader. One, it requires a hyper focus around simplification. There's so many things happening in the world today that we need to, again, stay hyper focused on the critical few things, not 27 things. But what are the critical few things that organizations need to do? And as an HR leader, it's how can we make work simpler? How can we remove the noise from their work processes? And that's so important because how do we create space for people to do more of their own unique best work? We call that engagement. You got to do both of those things because one without the other is not sustainable. So how do we create sustainability in the midst of chaos?
Yeah, I completely, and kind of echoed what I was going to say in terms of what I'm hearing from them. Many of them are, as I said, using this as an opportunity, as a great opportunity to make significant change and drive some initiatives that they've been wanting to do for many, many years. Now is the time to make the change. What do people keep saying recently? I've seen on LinkedIn, was it never waste a good crisis?
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of people saying that. But there's part of that's very true. There's so much opportunity to come out of this. Obviously, a lot of negative things are going through, but there's also a lot of opportunity coming through this. How are you helping companies? Because what are some of the specific things that you're doing now with clients to help them through this? Obviously, the title of today's show is the secret sauce to keeping any team engaged. How are you helping your clients do that?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we've seen in our data. Now that we are, 3.5, 4 months into COVID, we actually are starting to see some data come through. Early on, we didn't have data because things were happening too fast and it was just too soon. But the good news about keeping any team engaged is that secret sauce is a constant. So it has not changed in the midst of organizational nor global disruption. That secret sauce is the same. And what we know from the data in the research, this is not something that we just kind of sort of think, although it is somewhat intuitive, but the secret sauce to keeping any organization, any team, any person engaged is attention from their most important person to them. And of course, that most important person, no surprise, is their team leader. We say team leader, not just a hierarchical team leader, but anyone who provides you support, guidance, and direction at work. And so what we help organizations do, regardless of what's happening in the outside world, is how do you help create that ritual? How do you embed that ritual of attention into the organization? Because it's easy to say, right? Of course, attention, we all love attention. We're humans. This is us. We all want to be loved. If we weren't at work, we would say love. Attention at work is kind of love at work, even though, again, it's uncomfortable to say the L word sometimes. Like, how do you do that? And again, what we know from the data and the research is that it's actually quite a simple practice for any team leader to do. Anybody can do this. So it's really about talking to people about the work. And it's 3 simple questions. It's, what are your priorities? How can I help? And how are you feeling? And when you systematize that inside of an organization and create that frequency of practice, you see the needle on engagement move. And you see it move not a little bit, you see it move a lot, like sometimes 100% increases, and you see it move really quickly. I often describe engagement as more of a light switch. So as soon as you turn the attention on, engagement goes up. As soon as you stop the attention, you turn that light switch off, engagement goes down. So that super light touch fundamental practice of paying attention to people, and hopefully for the best of them, not for what's broken. People aren't broken. Everybody has gifts and talents. So when I see you for that, and I show that, pay that attention to you from that lens really frequently, the engagement needle goes up. It's that simple.
Those questions in that specific order for a reason? Just out of interest? Okay.
No, and it's just an easy way to teach it, right? What are your priorities this week? How can I help? How are you feeling? And of course, now in the world, in the face of all of this disruption, the how are you feeling becomes even more important. And then when you do that through this strengths-based lens, when you start to see people and for those gifts and talents that you bring, I see you for the best of you. That's like the real amplifier to that conversation. It's all about frequency, having that conversation in the kind of now practice world of HR, the thing that I always did, that I think most of us have always done. You can use the annual performance review as a really nice example of that. Oh, once a year, you're going to go have this really powerful conversation with someone. No one cares. Everyone hates it, as a matter of fact, for lots of reasons, which I'd be happy to chat about. But when you have that light touch frequent conversation, and the frequency, by the way, is yearly, or not yearly, sorry, is weekly. Like the magic frequency is weekly, super light touch every week. It's just like a metronome, just like this, because work happens all the time. And if you can systematize that frequency, it's why we built the software that we did. We didn't get into this business as a tech company. We got in as how do we help leaders be better leaders company? But without a support and sustainability approach, technology, it's really difficult to maintain. So maintaining that super light touch frequency every week, it is the secret sauce. It's almost in a way a little bit magical if it weren't so common sense.
What does that look like then? Is it like integrate with current systems in businesses and then send notifications? Like, what does that look like? Is it like a nudge system? Hi, Chris, you haven't touched in with Amy this week. What does it look like?
Yeah, exactly. And, not necessarily commercial for our software, but ours was designed very specifically to help organizations systematize this. And so what it looks like, and the way that we've done it, and the way that we've had a lot of success, or I should say our clients have had success, is every week team members, individuals, and even if you're a team leader, you're a team member, you still have a boss, you still have a team leader. And you have your own work to do in today's world, especially. Like no one, I don't know of anybody who's just a manager. But every week I submit a little bit of information so that my team leader can see it. So I let them know, how did my week go this past week? Did I have a chance to use my strengths every day? Did I add outstanding value? We actually ask a couple questions that are super interesting that people get a little uncomfortable with at first. We actually ask, what activities did you love? What activities did you loathe this week? So that's how you kind of start to dig into and click into that strength thing. Where's your best? Where are you at your own unique best? And what are your priorities and what help do you need from your team leader? And then team leaders can see that. So it helps make that connection really effective as well as really efficient. We do some nice little light touch coaching tips in there. And yeah, you're right. It is the nudge. That reminder that comes every week to my phone or to my email. In my case, it happens to be I have both. Reminds me to do it. And I'm not the world's best team leader. So I say, I help design and build that system, that piece of technology for me, like the everyday reluctant team leader. Most of us don't want to be team leaders. Most of us took the job as a manager, if you call it that, or whatever you want to call it. Most of us took that job because it was a step up, because it was more money and it was a fancier job title. And so how do we help the everyday team leader do what the best team leaders do? And that's what the best team leaders do. So you just systematize that. All of a sudden you get that rolling and you create this practice, and pretty soon you're doing it every week and you've got a whole bunch of people doing it every week. And then all of a sudden your organization feels a little bit different.
Obviously everything you do is grounded in data. How do you quantify the return on investment of the work that you do? Because I think that's very difficult. I've seen many companies attempt to do something similar to what you're talking about, but many of them don't have the data to kind of back it up. So how do you go about that?
So there's a couple ways that we do that. On a client by client basis, it's data. And because we collect not only engagement data frequently, but we also work with our clients looking at things like turnover data. And of course, it's a little bit different right now. But when you connect that is, how often does someone get attention? So we track that because every week I respond to an item that says, did your team leader connect with you about your priorities? Yes or no? Did you get attention or not? And we can look at that attention data bounced up against engagement data. How all in are you? That very first thing that we talked about around engagement. And then you can look at turnover rates. And we do that person by person by person because we've got individual data. Of course, it's all behind the scenes, so it's all anonymized, et cetera. So that's one way that we do that. And we know that people who get more attention are more engaged and they're less likely to leave organizations. So we know that. The other thing that we recently did, which was absolutely fascinating, is we worked with Forrester, Forrester, the research folks, and actually did a study and created an aggregate kind of client, but based on talking with 5 of our clients. And so they talked with 5 of our clients, and through all of that information and intelligence, created kind of like this aggregate, what would one of our typical clients look like? And they did an ROI study. And I think it was somewhere just north of 200% ROI, which there's no guarantee that anybody else obviously is going to get that kind of return. But if you just common sense it for a minute and you think about, well, what if you have an organization where you've got, I don't know, I'm going to make up a number from one of the clients I was just talking to yesterday, where over 50% of your employees are stepping into their workplace, whether it be virtual, at home or in an office, and they're responding 5 out of 5 on an engagement survey, if they're all in. By the way, the U.S. average is 17% of working adults in the U.S. are all in, fully engaged, we call it. So what if your organization what if half of the people came to work fully engaged? So even though that ROI data, it's amazing, and turnover data is amazing, and you kind of layer those things, and then you put your common sense own personal experience on. If you just put your own hat on for a minute and you go, what would my work look like? How would I feel about my work if I showed up all in every day? It's a pretty profound thing. And one of the mistakes that we as HR practitioners I'm just going to talk about me. One of the mistakes that I made as a practitioner trying to get this to happen was doing all kinds of stuff, lots of stuff. So it would be big, long engagement surveys. It would be action plans. It would be, big, complicated leader development programs. It would be town halls. It would be 360s. It would be performance management. goal setting, all of those things in an effort to help people do more, better work. And I hate to say it, but when I left the companies, especially my last organization that I worked for, having spent literally tens of millions of dollars on all of those things, I didn't leave those organizations with this amazing cadre of leaders. I didn't, despite all the investment that I make. So I think one of the power questions we as practitioners need to ask ourselves is, where are we investing? Are we investing in the right ways and the right places? And not just from a money perspective, but also from an emotional perspective. Expecting leaders to go tell leaders who, by the way, probably don't want to be leaders, team leaders, people leaders, asking those leaders to go have those conversation with team members where you go tell them all the things that they're doing wrong. No one wants to do that. No one wants to hear that. I'm not saying that it doesn't sometimes need to happen. That does not help performance. It's counterproductive to performance. So rethinking how we do all of that. And as we said before, removing all the waste, removing all those activities and practices that aren't moving the needle, and hyper-focusing on the things that do is a game changer. It's a game changer for your organization, but even more importantly than that, it's a game changer for your employees.
I think it's been highlighted over the past few months is we really need to invest in our leaders right now. They're having to managing this in this new unforeseen circumstances, and giving them some simple tools like what you're talking about to be able to check in with the teams regularly, ask those 3 simple questions. That alone is going to be so impactful, because a lot of times they kind of feel a little bit helpless kind of managing the team. I know I'm struggling right now. And by the way, I was one of those managers, like you mentioned, who was given the promotion because I was great at sales, and all of a sudden I'm now a leader of a team. And back then I would have loved a system like that with just to help me and support me with my team. Even just those 3 questions alone, to be honest, would have been a game changer, just to sit down and have a simple process to go through my team. Adding the technology piece is going to obviously increase that exponentially as well. So super exciting.
For sure. And again, that double down on the things that we know for sure make a difference. And it's not the only answer, by the way. I mean, work is complicated. Life is complicated. Humans are complicated. But one of the very few things that we know absolutely for sure from the research and the data, like it's not, again, we're not making it up. And it's common sense. It's just not common practice. Is attention is the most powerful accelerant to engagement and performance. Like that's the amplifier. And when you flip that thing that we have inside of us as humans, that negativity bias, and if you can just dial that down a little bit and start to see people for the best of themselves, which is the strengths piece, when you combine frequency and strengths and light touch and simplicity, it happens and it's very sustainable. I mean, I've been working with one of my clients, it happens to be a healthcare organization, for over 5 years, since almost when I joined the Marcus Buckingham Company. The change that they have seen and how that organization feels and how folks in that organization show up. And it's one thing to see it in the data, which is incredibly powerful. And I'm an engineer, so I have data head. I love the data. I love good data, by the way. Not, big data is just lots of numbers. I like smart data, like real data. We've got an amazing research team. But when I look at that organization and the CEO said to me, it feels different here. And you combine that emotional experience and how people are experiencing work with the data. I've just never seen anything like it. And even if I didn't work here, I think I would say that same thing. But that requires us as HR professionals to kind of sit, at least take a pause on some of those things that we always thought to be true, like action planning and 360s and all of those things. And not that they're necessarily all bad, but just ask yourself the question, what's the last thing that you did that was a game changer for your organization? Most CHROs, when I ask them, kind of go, yeah. That's usually what they say.
The culture impact. One of the things that defines your culture is your leadership and your line managers and the way they treat and interact with your people. So have you seen big culture shifts in the organizations that you work with as well? If so, could you share some examples?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think the one I just told you about, the healthcare organization, is a great example of that as well. And I think culture is such an interesting topic. I think it's, again, another one of those things that we're not exactly sure what it is. We all talk about it. And it's one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it, right? You know it when you experience this all the time when you're talking to CHROs, like you could just kind of feel it. And the way I often describe it is like, what are those very, very few singular threads that wind through an organization, top to bottom, every which way, horizontally, vertical, all over the place? There's not only those threads, but they're somewhat unique to the organization. So one of my clients that I'm working with, the CHRO described it this way. And he said, we're creating a culture of attention. Like that, integrity, yes, ethics, yes, absolutely, all those things. But for them, they're doubled down on that thing that there is no equivocating. Is that the right word? That's a very fancy word for an engineer. The one thing that they will not waver on is a culture of attention. We are an organization who's committed to helping our employees see each other for the best of themselves, and by creating a culture of attention and conversation. Wow, I want to work for that company. I want to be in that company. And they don't always get it right, by the way. Like none of us ever get it right all of the time. But that's a pretty powerful statement for an organizational leader to make. And now they've backed it up with leader development that's centered around that, with employee development that's centered around that, with a tool, by the way, that helps support and sustain that. And by looking at the right KPIs and the right metrics in the organization. And when you kind of shrink wrap that all together, that's when you get those organizations where you go, how'd they do that? Like, how did that happen? And by the way, how did they do that? Not on a 5-year journey, but how did they do that in 12 months?
Yeah. And I love the fact that you're systemizing it, everything. You're not relying on human error at the same time. And then it becomes part of the culture, right? Because when I become a manager, that's how I was led by my leader. So then it starts, after a few, they say, generations, it starts becoming part of the culture, part of the DNA of the business. This is what we do. We make sure we ask the question of how are you, with real meaning and intent, not because we just was told to ask the question as well. And that kind of echoes all the way through the organization as well, which becomes very, very powerful. And I've worked in 2 businesses that were complete opposites in that respect as well. What's the danger or the risk to companies that don't do this?
Oh, I think the danger and the risk is that they're just going to keep, number one, making investments that don't pay off. Again, not just a financial investment, but emotional investment of their employees. Like, it is hard work to have those yucky conversations. I often describe it as like I'd break it out into a rash when it came to performance review time, and you have to have that one big conversation. So I think the risk is, number one, the emotional burden that you're putting on your employees. You're missing out on so much potential for productivity, quality, innovation, resilience. Like, you name your thing that we're trying to get, you're missing all of that. You can get people to proficiency. You can make sure they have the skills they need to do their job. But how do you get to extraordinary? Attention gets you to extraordinary. And so they're missing out on all of that. And I think they're also missing out on really doing the actions that say to every single one of their employees, you are a unique human being that has unique gifts and talents. Our job as HR, as stewards of the organization's talent, is to help create a system and an approach and the tools to be able to make that happen, to be able to help each and every one of you be at your very best as much as we possibly can in the context of work. Yes, we still have to get things done for sure, but how can we help kick it above that proficiency line? That's what you're missing out on.
When you're speaking to other CHROs on a daily basis, what are the main things they're coming to you with? What are the main challenges? Or they're saying, Amy, look, I know you've been on the other end of this as a former HR executive yourself. What are the key things they're coming to you with? Before the pandemic as well, right? What are the key things that they're saying to you that they need help with?
Yeah, and by the way, I think they're coming to us for the same things right now. It's just faster.
Yes.
Right, and it's more uncertainty with which they are coming to that conversation. But they come to us for a number, really 3 big things. One is, help me get better leaders. We need leader development. It's funny because when you do an engagement survey, usually you get the engagement survey back, and one of the things almost every organization learns By the way, it's almost always the same. It says, hey, we don't have great leaders, because most organizations don't have this cadre of great leaders, because most of us don't want to be leaders in the first place. It's a hard job. So they come to us through that leader door. Like, we need to develop leaders. They come to us from a team performance door. It's like, we've got to get more performance out of our people. Like, we know it's there, but we don't know how to tap into it. So they come from that team performance engagement door. And then we do have clients who also come to us from a performance management measurement door, which is kind of this interesting, it's not a side business, but this other interesting lane that often happens, particularly with big organizations who's have gotten so sucked into kind of that black hole of performance measurement stuff that it gets in the way of those other two things. That couple months out of the year when your organization grinds to a halt, when it's performance management time. Like, we do the right things in terms of developing leaders, we do the right things in terms of engagement and team performance, but then 2 or 3 months out of the year, we go through this other process thing over here, which is supposed to help performance. At least I thought it was, but it really doesn't help performance. It really makes it worse. How do we do that? So we have clients that come to us with help in that world as well. And we've got some pretty innovative, unique approaches around that.
I could see the pain going through your mind of past experiences in your career, having to do those performance reviews or annual review. It almost seems crazy to do an annual review now, doesn't it?
It does. And the challenge, there's a couple challenges. One, if you just think about this year with all the disruption, if your organization's on a calendar year for your business, if you think about goal setting, let's just say you set goals, and let's go January through first part of February, because that's how it works, right? You set goals over a very long period of time. How many of those goals are still relevant today? They're not. And the world moves very quickly. Even regardless, take the pandemic to the side and everything that's happening, the world moves fast. So some sort of an annual cycle is no longer relevant, even the best of times today. So you've got that thing happening, and then you've got the whole ucky conversation thing happening, and you've got the bad data thing happening. We collect this data and we expect people to rate people, and we're horrible raters of other people anyway. Good raters of our own experiences, bad raters of someone else. And then we bump them up against some fake model that somebody developed around the perfect employee or the perfect whatever. And of course, there is no model. And you combine all that together with the uckiness of goal setting and percentages and trying to rate people, and it's just in fake metrics to say that we measured something. You think about SMART goals, right? And SMART goals are not very smart for almost all of us. It's kind of a crazy thing when you step back a little bit. And I think that's why as a practice, as an HR practice, we've been hearing about for years, well, we need to change how we do performance management. And an interesting thing about that is, yes, but I urge people to think about it a little differently. I urge them to think about it as performance measurement, not management. Manage is an awful word, by the way, like, ugh. But how do we reliably measure knowledge worker, particularly performance, when we don't have countables? We don't have countables. That's why we did goals, because we could kind of check a box and we could count them. That's not reliable either, for lots of reasons that we just talked about. So how do we get data to be able to see into the performance of our organization? That's on one side of the house. That's for us as practitioners to help inform downstream talent decisions, whether it be talent planning or comp or whatever. What's measured gets measured. It's not what's measured gets done. So if you think about it, I always thought that we did performance management to get more performance, and that's not what happens. We measure performance to help inform downstream talent decisions. Great, full stop. On the other side of the equation, we call it talent activation. How do you get more better out of your people? How do you get more better performance? The mechanism for that is attention. Totally different thing, different work stream, different process, different audience, different mechanism, different actions. So part of what I help our clients do is to separate those two things and do both really, really well in a research data informed way. But you need to separate those two things. What's measured does not get done. What's measured gets measured. Both really important, but very, very different.
Vishal said, based on your experience, what's the best way to align an employee's aspirations with the company, with what the company wants to do? So, the why of the employee and the why of the business.
Yeah, and sometimes there is a mismatch. Again, we work in the real world, and in the real world, things are not perfect, and a lot of times they're far from it. One of the things that we do know, again, based on our data, is that one of the power question that measures engagement is, in my work, I'm challenged to grow. Kind of that career-y question. It's not, I have a clear career path in front of me. That's not the item that drives engagement, that helps me do more, better work to be at my best every day. It's, in my work, I'm challenged to grow. So I think from a practitioner perspective, I would challenge all of us practitioners to, again, rethink, what are we actually trying to do, and what are people actually looking for? And there's no such thing as a straight line career path for most folks. There might be for nursing, there might be for some engineering functions, but not for very many of us. So I think we need to also break that mold a little bit and kind of bust some of those myths about the answer to people wanting career growth is a career path. Look at me, I'm an engineer. Here I am doing HR stuff.
What does the kind of future look like for you, Amy, after giving one of the things you said at the beginning of the show was the opportunities, and how do we come out of this? What are your hopes for, the new world of work, let's say, even though I don't like that word? What are your hopes of where we come out of this, on how we come out of this?
I hope we come out of this with a lot more awareness of our own selves. In the beginning, one of the opening questions that you guys had up on the screen was, and I even wrote it down, it says, what are you most grateful for today? And I think we need to ask a different question. I think we need to ask a question is, what are you grateful to yourself for today? We look out first, right? We're looking out and we ask that question all the time. And it's a beautiful question, but what are you grateful for yourself today? And it starts with each of us as individuals, even though we put so much focus on team leaders and it should be there, but you got to start with you. It starts with your own heart. And so I hope that we come out of the situation that we're in, thinking about ourselves a little bit more and being a little bit more introspective, and also being grateful for ourselves. I often describe it as being selfish in service of others rather than being selfish at the expense of others. So I hope we come out of this with that. I also hope that we come out of this with more intentional focus on the critical few things, and as stewards of the organization's talent, have the courage to do those critical few things, to create a culture of attention, to not use bad data to make downstream talent decisions, to realize that this is a subjective business we're in HR. I know we want it to be objective. I know we want to quantify so many things, and we can do some of that. But ultimately, we're subjective human beings, and we make subjective decisions, and sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we make the wrong call. That's part of the deal, HR folks, is that sometimes we make the wrong call, and we need to say that. Sometimes we make the wrong call, but not to brush it under the rug and not to pretend that there's all this objectivity out there, because there's not. So I hope we walk out of this being smarter about ourselves and smarter about other people. And quite frankly, I'm going to use the L word again, just more loving and caring about the world and the people around us. Hopefully we've learned this lesson for the last time. I don't know if we have or not, but my dream of dreams, that we've learned this lesson for the last time, both through the pandemic as well as through so many of the racial injustices and oppression, especially with the Black community, that has been happening the last couple of weeks. It's heartbreaking. You and I were chatting beforehand, and I said, to me, we always talk about moments that matter. I hear that phrase a lot. I think it's what you do with the moment that matters. Let's do something with this moment. Please, let's do something with this moment. None of us have it perfect, but we got to do something. And as talent practitioners, again, I think we're in a very unique opportunity to make the world a better place, to make the world of work a better place. So we should do that.
Amazing, Amy. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was a real pleasure. I feel like we could do another hour as well. And thank you to everyone else on LinkedIn. I know we didn't get to all of your questions, but I'll send over Amy after. Hopefully she can jump in and maybe get back to you on LinkedIn and when she has some time free. Before we wrap up, Amy, people are already asking in the comments, where can people connect with you if they want to connect with you personally and continue your conversation? And secondly, where can they learn more about the Marcus Buckingham Company and get in contact with the team as well? Yeah,
the best way to get in contact with me is honestly through LinkedIn. I am constantly checking my messages. I do a little thing called Thursday Think About. So almost every Thursday, not quite, I'm always writing something that's a little hopefully thought-provoking or interesting. And I love it when people respond back. So LinkedIn is the best place for me. And our website is tmbc.com. So T as in Tom, M as in Mary, B as in boy, C as in cat. .com. So tmbc.com. There's a lot of great information and research and links to things on there. And you can see a little bit about the work that we do with our clients and our technology product called Standout.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining us. And I wish you all the best until next week. See you later.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.